All right, so we got more information, but not necessarily more clarity around the ongoing peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. So today, we're going to take a look at a series of statements made in interviews earlier this morning by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. They explain why a ceasefire is no longer necessary to achieve long-term peace. Witkoff talks about some NATO Article 5-like security guarantees for Ukraine, which would be groundbreaking if he's relaying that correctly. And then both of them are pushed on what exactly is Russia being asked to give up in order to achieve peace. Now, starting out, Witkoff begins here by talking about just how much was accomplished in Alaska and drops a few little nuggets that we'll get into later in today's video. Let's check that out.
But are reports accurate or inaccurate that the president does support that ask from Putin?
I think the president supports a peace deal, Shannon, and he got through almost all of it in Alaska. I mean, I was personally surprised at the amount of wins that we had that day. It was right down the line. We agreed on much more robust security guarantees. The Russians agreed on enshrining legislatively language that would prevent them from, or they would attest to not attempting to take any more land from Ukraine after a peace deal, where they would attest to not violating any European borders. So we got through quite a bit, and there's a whole lot more.
Well, hey, so long as there was an actual pinky promise from the Russians and not just a regular promise that they won't invade their neighbors or ever do anything like this again, then I think we're good and we can all go home, call it a day, wrap it up. Right? Hopefully, the United States, would be great if Russia decides to enshrine in their constitution no more wars of aggression against our neighbors. Super. I'm here for it. Hopefully, our leadership is not putting too much stock in that promise. We got to make sure we have something in place to ensure that that is actually adhered to, which gets into the security guarantees, and that's coming here in a moment. Now, one of the challenges that we're going to see, kind of the tension throughout today's video, is we're hearing both arguments. One, that there were so many wins and so much was accomplished in this summit, but at the same time, when they're pressed for that, for details in either direction, we'll see Witkoff and Rubio kind of fall back on very, very broad talking points. And on the one hand, I get it, because you don't necessarily, and Rubio will talk about this, don't want to lay out all of these details amidst ongoing negotiations, but it does then make it hard to claim all sorts of victories because, it's just kind of a trust us. We made a lot of progress. We just can't tell you about it. Now, starting out here, Witkoff did get into why a ceasefire isn't needed right now. And I think this was a great question. And spoiler alert, I think it was an awful answer. But let's go ahead and play that real quick.
I understand the idea of like a larger peace deal is an important point. But it was President Trump that had said that he wanted a ceasefire agreed to at the meeting on Friday. And he didn't get it, and there are now 5 Ukrainians who are dead because the Russians continue to bombard Ukraine. I still don't understand how not getting the ceasefire deal is a win. I understand the idea of wanting this bigger package, of course, but a ceasefire would at least stop the bloodshed right now.
Jake, the thesis of a ceasefire is that you'd be discussing all of these issues that we resolved in Alaska. You'd be discussing security guarantees. There's not a person on the European team who didn't acknowledge that we made substantial progress at this meeting. We certainly did. So we cut through all kinds of issues that would have to be discussed and agreed to during a ceasefire period. The fundamental issue, which is some sort of land swap, which is obviously ultimately in the control of the Ukrainians, that could not have been discussed at this meeting. We intend to discuss it on Monday. Hopefully we have some clarity on it, and hopefully that ends up in a peace deal very, very soon.
Again, I think that is a really bad answer. I don't think there's anybody in Russia or Ukraine right now that would say, yes, we have resolved all of the issues that would have been discussed during a ceasefire. And again, this is going to be this tension throughout today's video where here we have Witkoff saying all of those issues have been resolved. We're there. We did it. But as soon as they're pushed on other topics, you'll hear both Rubio and Witkoff say, well, we couldn't quite get to that point because Ukraine wasn't there, and Ukraine has to agree on all this stuff. So we can only move the ball so far. It is hard to imagine. I can't tell you one thing that Russia and Ukraine have agreed on at this point. So the idea that, don't worry about a ceasefire, guys, because all of the stuff that would have happened during a ceasefire is done. We knocked it out on Friday. And, you know, the personal bias coming out here, I think ignoring a ceasefire and moving on to the larger peace negotiation was a mistake. I think that's a gift for Putin. If we can't get the short-term, relatively easy thing done, I'm not very confident we're going to be able to make a larger peace deal feasible. Witkoff did talk a little bit there about Monday, and just to get this, make sure this is out there as we get into the rest of these clips, Ukrainian President Zelensky is coming to Washington, D.C. on Monday to talk with President Trump. He's coming with the NATO Secretary General and a lot of other European leaders. My understanding is that is going to be all-day meetings. It's not like a quick 30-minute session in and out, but throughout the day, multiple sessions, multiple breakout rooms, all sorts of hopefully very productive conversations, and we should have a lot more information on Monday. But I don't want to skip over that Witkoff security guarantee because that was actually really serious if it's actually accurate. So let's dive in a little bit more as to what that might look like.
You mentioned the Article 5 guarantee of NATO, an attack on one and it's an attack on all. Russia would allow that to happen, that any further incursions into Ukraine, Russia would understand would be seen as an attack on all NATO members?
No, Jake, that's not what I said. What I said is that we got to an agreement that the United States and other European nations could effectively offer Article 5-like language to cover a security guarantee. So Putin has said that a red flag is NATO admission.
Right.
And so what we were discussing was assuming that that held, assuming that the Ukrainians could agree to that and could live with that, and everything is going to be about what the Ukrainians can live with. But assuming they could, we were able to win the following concession: that the United States could offer Article 5-like protection, which is one of the real reasons why Ukraine wants to be in NATO. We sort of were able to bypass that and get an agreement that the United States could offer Article 5 protection, which was the first time we had ever heard the Russians agree to that.
So this would actually be groundbreaking in a lot of ways. Now, the reason that Russia does not want Ukraine in NATO is not because they don't like Brussels as the headquarters or they are allergic to the color blue and the NATO flag. It's because of the military alliance and the security guarantees that come with NATO. That's the reason. So there's a couple ways to look at this. One, I unfortunately have to keep in mind that Witkoff may just not exactly know what he's talking about. We've seen that a couple times before in different negotiations. He keeps using the term NATO Article 5 type, which Russia has continually laid down this line that Ukraine will not be in NATO. That seems to be a hard line for them. So if we're trying to kind of skirt around that and come up with this alternative without, triggering the Russian spidey sense, it seems like a bad move to keep comparing it to the thing they don't like. So I don't exactly know that strategy. It's possible that if this was something offered up by Russia, that Putin sees it as a way for him to go back to his domestic audience and say, I secured a guarantee that Ukraine will not be in NATO for 20 years or whatever it is. And he can check that box. Meanwhile, there is some sort of security guarantee in place that essentially is Article 5 just by a different name. Maybe. Again, if Witkoff is relaying that information correctly, that would be probably the most groundbreaking statement and concession we've seen since this war began. Now, Witkoff did get pushed on this, and again, these guys went on multiple interviews today, got pushed on this in another interview where he provided a little bit more in terms of details. Here we go.
Chief.
So let's talk about the security guarantees, because you mentioned those. What does that mean in practicality? What is the U.S. willing to commit to that effort to give Ukraine the assurances it needs to come to the table?
It means that the United States is potentially prepared to be able to give Article 5 security guarantees, but not from NATO, directly from the United States and other European countries. That is big. I mean, really big.
Does it mean boots on the ground? What does it mean, but logistically?
I think part of the discussion that we're going to have on Monday throughout the day, because there's going to be breakout sessions there, is exactly the specifics of what the Ukrainians feel that they need. Because remember, as mediators, we were at this summit to advance the Ukrainian position, and we did that. And we did it successfully. Now it's for us to drill down on the granular details of exactly what the Ukrainians need to give them a sense of security in the future, and, by the way, what the Europeans need as well. And we were fully committed to be there for that purpose.
So again, this would be huge in so many ways. This is one of the key, if not the key, Ukrainian ask at this point. It's not about territory, it's not about the size of their military, it's not about reparations. A big one is POWs and the children being returned. Security guarantees is regularly at the top of the Ukrainian list, because no matter what, and this has been one of my arguments personally, is peace is great. We all want peace, but peace is no good if it just leads to a bigger war or another war sometime down the road, right? And that's the major concern with any sort of short-term, unenforceable ceasefire, is that it just gives Russia time to regroup. Interestingly enough, when you look at Russian channels, they're concerned that Ukraine is going to regroup. But either way, a long-term durable peace in this specific context can really only be achieved if there are viable security guarantees. So if that's actually on the table and Russia appears to be ready to let it happen, and more important than anything, if the United States is actually ready to say that out loud and put it in writing, that would be a notable shift in our policy towards Ukraine, towards Russia, and towards this war. Now, Witkoff was pushed a little bit more here on what exactly Ukraine is being asked to give up. There's been a lot of reports in recent days that Ukraine is going to be pressured to giving up territory. He was asked, and then Rubio, this exact question. Let's give that a listen.
So Trump told Fox that he and Putin, quote, largely have agreed on, unquote, land swaps. And sources tell CNN that President Trump told European leaders that Putin will agree to end the war and not attack Ukraine or other European countries, as you mentioned earlier, in exchange for Ukraine ceding the entire Donbass region to Russia, including territory that isn't even currently occupied by Russian forces. Is that accurate? Is that what's on the table, but Ukraine has to agree to cede all of Donbass?
I think, you know, look, I don't know that we have the time now to go through all the different issues on these 5 regions. There are 5 regions here. It's always, in our view, been the crux of the deal. Those 5 regions, the Russians have previously said that they wanted it at the administrative lines. The administrative lines are the actual legal boundary lines, as compared to the contact lines. The Russians made some concessions at the table with regard to all 5 of those regions. There is an important discussion to be had with regard to Donetsk and what would happen there. And that discussion is going to specifically be detailed on Monday when President Zelensky arrives with his delegation and some of the other European leaders. And hopefully we can cut through and make some decisions right then and there on that.
All right, so I got it. There's not time in a 3-minute CNN interview to go into the details of what Putin wants and what Ukraine. There's got to be time sometime, right? I feel like these are the details we want. That makes me think that maybe it's just not information for public consumption. That's the optimistic side of me. The pessimistic side of me says that there's actually not a conversation happening there. I'm trying to remain optimistic, trying to remain in good mood here, guys. So we're not getting details on exactly what the line of control might look like, what Putin exactly wants, and if that's changed. I mean, we know publicly what he said, but did that change behind closed doors? No indication there. A key component from Witkoff is that he says they're not going to be pushing Ukraine to give up territory. That's going to be up to Ukraine. It was something that was echoed here by Secretary Rubio in a couple different clips, and it's worth reiterating this. Here's Secretary Rubio being asked about what Ukraine may or may not be forced to give up for a peace deal.
Mr. Secretary, I want to show folks what Ukraine looks like right now. This is a map of Ukraine. That red section there, that's the area currently under control by Russia. It's about 20% of the entire country. There are reports that Putin is asking to keep all of this territory in a potential deal. Is that what's being discussed? Can you confirm that?
Well, I can confirm that he's given speeches in which he has said that repeatedly.
So he's asking for that now in these private conversations?
Well, look, ultimately, if the Ukrainians are not willing to give that up, and no one's pushing Ukraine to give that up, and so I don't think that's what, if there's going to be a peace deal, it's not going to look like that. But he certainly is making demands. He's certainly asking for things that the Ukrainians and others are not willing to be supportive of, and that we're not going to push them to give. And the Ukrainians are asking for things that the Russians are not going to give up on. I know this sounds, I know everybody wants to have more detail, but we're trying to have a serious negotiation here and see if we can find any middle ground between two warring parties in a very difficult war where the Russians feel, as they always do, like they have momentum on their side, and the Ukrainians have been incredibly brave in fighting back and in the defensive posture they've taken. The Ukrainians have inflicted a tremendous amount of damage on the Russians. I think last month alone, 20,000 Russian soldiers were killed in 1 month in this war. So the Ukrainians have inflicted tremendous amount of damage on the Russians as a result of this. Both sides are very dug in. This is a difficult one, but we're going to continue to work on it because the president's made it a priority to try to end the war that should have never happened.
So, of course, as soon as this summit kicked off and it was being talked about between Russia and the United States, a major concern was that there would be some sort of concession on behalf of Ukraine. But understandably so, like, that can't happen. We can't give up Ukrainian territory. That is up to Ukraine. The terms of a ceasefire is up to Ukraine. The terms of a peace deal is up to Ukraine. Yes, we have some influence, but we can't make those decisions. So it's nice to see Secretary Rubio not just mentioning that, but it comes up again in another interview. He really hammers that point home. Here we go.
A European diplomat has confirmed to Fox that President Trump supports Putin's proposal for Russia to take full control of Luhansk and Donetsk, all of Donbass. Do you support this move?
No, first of all, I don't know who told you that, but they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, the president has said that in terms of territories and stuff, these are things that Zelensky's going to have to decide on. These are things that the Ukrainian side is going to have to agree to. That's all the president is trying to do here is narrow down the open issues, narrow them down, and then see if we can play some role in bringing that closer together so we can stop and end this war once and for all. Look.
So Rubio pretty confident in that one, saying, I don't know where you're getting your information, right? Any of these decisions will be up to Ukraine. Not as confident when he's being asked about what Russia is going to be forced to give up. You'll hear throughout a bunch of these clips where Rubio says, hey, look, people are going to have to give things up. That's how negotiations work. Russia and Ukraine are not going to both walk away from this being perfectly happy. They're not going to get everything they want. So I think rightfully so, these reporters push him a little bit. And they say, got it, understood. We generally know what is being asked of Ukraine to give up. It's mostly territorial control. So what about Russia? What is the thing that they have to give up that they're not going to be happy about? Here we go.
I understand that these negotiations are ongoing, but can you name one thing that President Trump is asking Russia to give up in order to get peace?
Well, I'm not going to disclose those things because if we do, then you can imagine the negotiations could fall apart. These negotiations, look, I know everybody wants to know what's happening, and to a certain degree that's important. But what's more important is that these negotiations work. And for us to run to the press, like you see these leaks sometimes that are completely inaccurate, and in many cases, sometimes you see leaks out there that undermine the negotiations.
I'm actually going to stop because she had to cut him off because Rubio kept going in different directions and reel him back in and say, just name something. Give me something here to work with.
Mr. Secretary, what will Russia have to give up? What concessions will Russia, the aggressor, have to make as a part of this peace agreement?
Well, that's what these negotiations are about. And as you can imagine, everybody goes into a negotiation wanting 100% of what they want. That includes Ukraine, but obviously the Russians. And the only way to reach a deal on anything, whether it's in business or in politics or in geopolitics, the only way to reach a deal is for each side to get something and each side to give something.
And this kind of comes back to what we mentioned right at the beginning of the video, where we're on the one hand being told there's been a lot of progress, especially from Witkoff, but on the other hand, we can't get into the details of what that progress is. So it's hard to look at what's coming out right now and say, yes, we've definitely moved this in the right direction. I kind of like the Witkoff security guarantee. That would be positive. But, I mean, that definitely would be something that Russia would be ceding on, I guess, in a sense, if we think that, Russia has the ability to veto our relationships with sovereign countries around the world. But they continue to be pushed on this from these different reporters saying, what are the consequences going to be? Can you list anything? Can you name just one thing that Putin at this point is willing to give up. And this one I think is interesting because he's asked, what has Russia conceded? And then the conversation shifts to, there have been some asks. I don't know if that's intentional because those are very different things. Russia has offered something versus Russia has been asked something. I might be reading too much into that, but let's give that a listen.
Can you name any concessions that Vladimir Putin made during this meeting? Have any
I wouldn't name them on your program.
Have any concessions
I wouldn't name
been
them
asked?
on your program. Why would I do that?
Where is the pressure?
Of course, because you can't have a peace agreement. No, you can't have a peace agreement unless both sides give and get. You can't have a peace agreement unless both sides make concessions. That's a fact. That's true in virtually any negotiation. If not, it's just called surrender. And neither side is going to surrender. So both sides are going to have to make concessions. So, of course, concessions were asked. But what utility would there be of me going on a program and tell you we've wagged our finger at Putin and told him you must do this and you must do that? It's only going to make it harder and less likely that they're going to agree to these things. So these negotiations, as much as everyone would love it to be a live pay-per-view event, these discussions only work best when they are conducted privately in serious negotiations in which people who have to go back and respond to constituencies, because even totalitarian governments have constituencies they have to respond to, people have to go back and defend these agreements that they make, and so and figure out a way to explain them to people. So we need to create space for concessions to be made, but of course concessions were asked.
Now, in a lot of these clips, we actually saw the reporters, especially during this line of questioning, start to get kind of frustrated, and Witkoff stayed pretty calm all throughout. Rubio started to get a little fired up because they were at times like playing old clips for him where he would say, you can't trust Putin, he's a liar. And then they would like, why are you trusting him now? Which I got it, he's in the hot seat. But anyways, one of the pushes here was, hey, going into this, first off, we're not getting any information. So how can we just go with everything is moving along swimmingly? But one of the clear things was there was supposed to be a ceasefire. That was what President Trump talked about. Then we left the meeting, and immediately he said, by the way, no ceasefire. We're just going to go straight to peace. He's pushed on that here as well. Here we go.
So we're still a long ways off. I mean, we're not at the precipice of a peace agreement. We're not at the edge of one. But I do think progress was made towards one. But again...
But Secretary Rubio, we don't know what any of that progress is. And the president went into that meeting...
You're not going to.
Okay. The president went into that meeting saying he wanted a ceasefire and there would be consequences if they didn't agree on a ceasefire in that meeting, and they didn't agree to a ceasefire. So where are the consequences?
Well, that's not the aim of this meeting. Look, first of all, you're not going to reach
the president said that was the aim.
Agreement.
All right, so yes and no. We'll play that clip here in a minute. That wasn't necessarily the aim, but President Trump leading up to this definitely said that if there's not a ceasefire, here's the clip.
Will Russia face any consequences if Vladimir Putin does not agree to stop the war after your meeting on Friday?
Yes, they will. Yeah.
What will the consequences
There will be
be?
consequences.
Sanctions, tariffs?
There will be, I don't have to say, there will be very severe consequences.
So, I mean, it's not crazy as to where that question comes from. We lay down that line in the sand, and there's been multiple lines drawn with Russia at this point. We haven't really followed through. So one of the questions here was, why not just add more sanctions? We've been talking about it for so long. It's always on the tip of our tongue. We always could do this. Be careful. If Russia doesn't do what we want, if they're not moving along, sanctions, why not? Here we go.
Sure.
But why not impose more sanctions on them and force them to agree to a ceasefire instead of accepting that Putin won't agree to one?
Well, first, I think that's something that a lot of people go around saying that I don't necessarily think is true. I don't think new sanctions on Russia are going to force them to accept the ceasefire. They're already under very severe sanctions. I think that it should be. You could argue that could be a consequence of refusing to agree to a ceasefire or the end of hostilities. But there is no evidence that more sanctions, because sanctions take months and sometimes years to bite. And we may very well wind up in that place. I hope not, because that means that peace talks failed. But we have to give every opportunity for peace a chance in this particular case. And that's what we're trying to do here. And so those options remain to the president. The minute he takes those steps, all talk stop. The minute we take those steps, there is no one left in the world to go talk to the Russians and try to get them to the table to reach a peace agreement. Sometimes
I feel like I'm going crazy here, where sanctions are on the table and that's a threat, and we're definitely going to do something if Russia doesn't agree to a ceasefire, and then a few days later that's actually not, that we're not going to do that. We never said that. What are you talking about? Or it's a good thing that we're not doing anything. Rubio was pushed again. Why not pressure Putin? We have these tools at our disposal. Why are we not pressuring them to try to get something like, a ceasefire? And in this clip, mind you, Rubio kind of hits at something that I think might be the bigger picture here. We're maybe looking to move on. Here we go.
Vladimir Putin did not give President Trump the ceasefire he sought, and now Putin says the root causes of the conflict have to be resolved in a peace agreement. Isn't the root cause the fact that Russia invaded in the first place?
Well, ultimately, yeah. But I mean, what he means by root causes is his long historical complaints that we've heard repeatedly. This is not a new argument. He's been making this for a long time. And it's the argument that it's Western encroachment. I don't want to get into it. It's just so long. But the bottom line is that we're not going to focus on all of that stuff. We're going to focus on this. Are they going to stop fighting or not? And what it's going to take to stop the fighting. And what it's going to take to stop the fighting, if we're being honest and serious here, is both sides are going to have to give, and both sides should expect to get something from this. And that's a very difficult thing to do. It's very difficult because Ukraine obviously feels, harmed, and rightfully so, because they were invaded, and the Russian side because they feel like they've got momentum in the battlefield and frankly don't care. Don't seem to care very much about how many Russian soldiers die in this endeavor. They just churn through it. So I think what the president deserves a lot of credit for is the amount of time and energy that his administration is placing on reaching a peace agreement for a war that's not a war that started under him. It's it's on the other side of the world. That said, I mean, it's relevant to us, but there are a lot of other issues you could be focused on. So tomorrow we'll be meeting with President Zelensky. We'll be meeting with European leaders. We just met with Putin. He's dedicated a lot of time and energy because he has made it a priority of his administration to stop or end war, stop wars or prevent them. And right now, this is the biggest war going on in the world. It's the biggest war in Europe since World War II. We're going to continue to do everything we can to reach an agreement that ends the dying and the killing and the suffering that's going on right now.
All right, so the last part there I think is actually pretty important. That little nugget in there about, look, we got a lot of other things we could be working on. The president spent a lot of time on this, and we heard this a while ago, kind of towards the start of the Trump presidency from Rubio. And just today, we started to hear it again. I heard it in at least 2 interviews. Let's play that second one real quick.
Have to do it. Look, the war in Ukraine gets a lot of attention, and I'm not saying it's an irrelevant thing. It's a very tragic thing that's going on. But life in America on a daily basis will be largely unaffected whether there's peace in Ukraine or not. That's just a fact. We have a lot of issues we're focused on, not just at home, but around the world. But the fact that the president has dedicated this much time to a war between 2 countries on another continent tells you how much he values peace. And we should be very thankful and grateful that we have a president who's a president of peace, who values peace and wants to use the power of his office to achieve the end of wars and the prevention of new ones.
All right, so kind of reading between the lines on that one, you have the U.S. Secretary of State looking at this war and saying, there's a lot of other things we could do. It's not going to have that big of an impact on us if it just continues on and we move to the next thing. So maybe keep that back in mind as we get more information on Monday. I hope this was helpful. There were like 87 clips of these guys and others talking today. That was mind-numbing. Tried to narrow it down to the ones that actually provided some value instead of just politicians babbling without actually saying anything, which is not always possible, but we try. Anyways, that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.